Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. The first story is called, Cut My Job? I worked for a major telecommunications company in the United States for over 10 years. One of the jobs I had there was an emergency overnight tech support for our major accounts. I'm talking about accounts like emergency services. All of this was handled by 11 people in a call center that was one of two in the country that was open all night, mainly for customers who were overseas. Because we were such a small team, and the people we dealt with were the overnight IT people at their various companies, we were on a first-name basis with many of the techs who called us. Then, one day, the vice president of our company decides to step down and take a job as the head of another call center. His brilliant idea is to make his call center the only call center for all business and government accounts in the country, including the ones my team handled overnight. Naturally, this meant dissolving my team. We were all very upset. We liked our job. Only the absolute best techs got to be on our team, and for good reason. When something we handled went down, it had to be taken care of fast. And some of the systems we dealt with were so obscure or old, that no one at the company except us and our daytime colleagues even knew they existed. This also meant that we had to be ready to answer at a moment's notice. So we spent most of the night doing nothing, just waiting for a call. The companies and government entities paid extra for this quick response. Even so, over the years, my team kept getting assigned more and more little jobs to do between calls, which we handled easily because, well, we were the best. It was almost my dream job. So, when we get word that our jobs are going to this other call center that, until now, wasn't even open overnight, we were upset, yet most of my team was still pretty supportive. We offered to train the new techs at the other call center, some of us even offered to travel there for a week or so to do it, but we were all turned down. Our last week on the job comes, and we're there mainly as a backup for the new team in the other call center. We're not being routed calls, but we're ready on chat if the new guys have any questions. The questions start coming in, and they're not what we expected. Instead of asking about obscure, outdated systems that no one but us even knew about, the new team is asking us about things like how to fill out a timesheet for a shift that starts before midnight and ends after. And this was their supervisor asking me. We end up answering really basic questions that anyone at our call center, much less anyone on our team, would have known, and we all got a bit worried. Then the supervisor who asked me about the timesheets asks how many calls we typically get in a night, and I say, between 2 and 5 per person, usually. Then he asks how many people were on my team. 11, I say, 8 to 10 on any given night. That surprised the supervisor. We have 33. I wondered why we were getting so few calls. They didn't have to do the little tasks my team did between calls, either. They weren't even trained for the calls they were getting. The next week, my team was transferred into the normal overnight call queue, handling boring calls from people who didn't read or listen to the directions we gave them about how to make their phones work while overseas. A week after that, other regular overnight workers start asking me and the other former elites questions about systems that only we would know about. Suspicious. A few days later, I get a call transferred to me, and it's one of the overnight IT guys from the major accounts. I ask how he got hold of me, and he says that the first guy he talked to transferred him to me. Turns out, of course, that the untrained workers at the new call center were still untrained. So they were just dumping the calls into my call center's general queue and hoping that out of the 60 or so techs working there, the one who'd pick up would be from the former major accounts team. Since 3 of our 11 people had quit when our team was dissolved, the odds of that were pretty low, which meant it took multiple transfers, which meant they weren't getting the help they needed in the time frame my company was contractually obligated to provide. I went to the director of my call center to let him know about this, hoping it would mean that since the new team was failing that hard, the company would see reason and reinstate my team again. But no. My director informed me that the team would not, under any circumstances, be reinstated at our call center. I could tell he was not happy about this at all. So then came the malicious compliance. My director told me and every other overnight tech at my center that, if we were transferred a call for a major account, we were not to touch it, as we were not authorized to handle those accounts. The next night, the accounts wouldn't even open for us, because our security clearance had suddenly been revoked. We were to transfer all such calls back to the correct queue. We were also instructed to forward any correspondence sent to us from the new major accounts team to our supervisors, whether chat or email. In a few days, the transfers to our center stopped. Now, I wish I could say that the company saw the error of its ways, my team was reinstated, and everything went back to the way it was. But it didn't. Instead, the company hemorrhaged major accounts like crazy. We lost accounts whose monthly bills were in the millions of dollars due to our failure to keep the terms of our contracts. Barely a month after it was created, the overnight team at the other call center was disbanded, and the jobs outsourced. Then the outsourcers started transferring the calls to my center. Again, I went to our director, hoping against hope my team would be reinstated. No again. But the transfers stopped. Again. And the company lost even more multi-million-dollar accounts. Last year, the company announced the layoff of tens of thousands of employees. I wonder why. I saw the writing on the wall and got the hell out with the best severance package I could. So did my call center director. He was no fool, either. All because some idiot executive had a bright idea and not even the slightest clue how to execute it. The next story is called, Supervisor Breaks the Rules. Several years ago, I worked as a local delivery driver for a steel processing plant. We would take stock units of the plate and structural steel and process them into parts our customers could use. Some processes, such as painting, would go to a third-party vendor and then come back to us for shipment to the customer. I worked on a set routine. Deliver to the paint shop in the morning and bring back the orders painted the day before. While that trailer was being unloaded, I would hook another trailer and deliver finished orders to a customer about 70 miles away from the shop. This delivery had a hard appointment time. And I could not miss it. When I returned after making the delivery, I would finish the day with short deliveries or pickups as needed and then go home. It was an easy, stress-free job as long as I stuck to a routine and made my appointments on time. Communication between departments was poor though, and it disrupted the entire process. For example, the scheduling department might think a certain production run had been finished and was gone for outside processing when in reality the production department hadn't even started the order yet. I spent a lot of afternoons driving around in an empty truck, chasing phantom orders that I knew I had never delivered because some office drone wanted me to check and make sure, or running hot orders out to vendors that were overlooked during my morning trip. Enter my main antagonist, one of the first shift production supervisors. I was constantly butting heads with him because he forever tried to hold up my truck for last-second add-ons. This wouldn't have been a big deal, except that they almost always interfered with my delivery, the one I had to be on time for. I kept explaining that I could do his errands in the mornings or afternoons, but he couldn't mess with the middle of my day. He was arrogant and condescending with everyone, but he took a special dislike toward me because I wasn't in his chain of command and wouldn't bend over backward to accommodate his wants. It didn't help that my direct superior was a little man that avoided conflict at any cost. I ended up taking a lot of heat from this production supervisor, even though he couldn't really punish me for meeting my other work obligations. Things finally came to a head when the supervisor came up to shipping with a large order that needed to go to paint. I was about to leave for my midday customer and told him so, but I had room left on the truck. If he wanted to load his parts on, I would deliver them on my way back from my primary delivery. This wasn't good enough for him. These parts were behind schedule and had to get painted immediately. If I delivered them in the afternoon, they wouldn't get painted until the following day, which would put him further behind. To top it off, this order required a special marine-grade paint that had been mistakenly delivered to our company location instead of the paint shop, and it all needed to go as soon as possible. We began our usual back and forth. I had a delivery appointment. I could do what he wanted, but I couldn't do it on his schedule. After a heated conversation, where he devolved into rudeness and name-calling of a nature unbecoming of his position, he said, "Fine. I'll take it myself in the other truck." In addition to the tractor-trailer that I drove, we had a smaller delivery truck on hand for occasional use. He decided to drive it on the down low, loading up and heading out without telling our shipping department. This would have been a grand idea, but driving either truck requires a commercial driver's license, which this supervisor did not have. I pointed this out to him, to which he replied that he was only going up the road, and everything would be fine. I pointed out that he didn't have a hazardous materials endorsement to transport the paint. Again, he was just going up the road, and I needed to shut the hell up, write him out directions to the paint shop, and get out of the way since I was useless anyway. So I did just that and wrote him out a perfect set of turn-by-turn directions. How is that malicious compliance? Well, this paint shop was about 30 miles up the road. But I knew, and he didn't, that about 15 miles up the road was a way station that always had at least 2 state troopers inside, and at least one of them was a commercial enforcement officer. The truck this supervisor wanted to drive wasn't equipped with a pass transponder that would allow him to bypass the scale, and I knew given his already demonstrated ignorance, he wouldn't know that he was required to pull in. I figured he would blow right past and that one of those troopers would put down his coffee long enough to chase him down and find out why. To my great delight, that is exactly what happened. The troopers saw him drive past and pulled him over. Then they escorted him back to the way station for a thorough inspection. For those unfamiliar, the transportation industry is highly regulated. Some might say it's over-regulated, but anyone that makes it a career knows it's best to follow the laws or face some serious consequences. The supervisor didn't know any of this and was like a lamb to the slaughter. The inspector ripped him to pieces. Among the biggest infractions he was cited for: no commercial driver's license, a $2,500 fine, up to $10,000 to the company. Misdemeanor charges: 90 days suspended driver's license, no hazmat endorsement, no documenting paperwork for the hazmat, no placards identifying the vehicle as carrying hazardous material, $50,000 fine to the company, more if it results in illness or injury or worse to another person. As a bonus, when the trooper escorted him back to the weigh station, the scalemaster saw him talking on his cell phone. The dude was making a panic call to the company manager. Using a handheld device is also a big no-no. That's another $2,500 and $10,000 to the company. The truck was put out of service at the weigh station until it had the proper bill of lading, hazmat paperwork, and a driver with a valid license. The supervisor wasn't allowed to leave himself until someone came to get him. Needless to say, he lost his job immediately. I suspected that would happen, so I hung around the shipping office after my afternoon delivery. I got to witness his walk of shame as he was escorted out of the building. I was never officially told just how much his fines were, but an educated guess puts it at thousands to him personally, and potentially close to $100,000 to the company. I do know the company tried to sue him in civil court to recoup their losses, although I don't know the outcome. I left to take another job shortly after. I figured that even though I wasn't the one at fault, my role in the fiasco wouldn't be looked upon in kind fashion. The best part though was that after months of watching him swagger around wearing a big hubris cowboy hat, I was the one that got to swat it off his head. The last story is called "A Lefty Has to Use a Fountain Pen." A number of years ago, I moved to a private school which could have been considered fairly highbrow, and as such was a fairly strict environment. Many of the rules were extremely antiquated, for example, standing every time a teacher entered the room and the such like. Now, one of these rules was that you absolutely had to use a fountain pen. No exceptions, apart from when pencils were necessary. When I first joined the school, I arrived with my trusty pencil case. Some pencils, rubber, that kind of stuff, and also a specific type of pen made by Uni-Ball, which looked like an ink pen, but was way less smudgy. But no, apparently this substitute pen was entirely unacceptable, according to one of the most Jobsworth-like of teachers. Most of the other teachers were equally as unforgiving, and so I was forced into purchasing a fountain pen, not an expensive one though, although my maths teacher, an ex-serviceman of all people, was rather forgiving about it. For those of you thinking that this is only a simple rule, and doesn't really matter, I'm afraid it wasn't. It was a fully written rule in the guidelines and was upheld just as much as any other. Stupid, I know. The key point of all of this is that I'm left-handed. As I'm sure my fellow lefties are aware, finding a pen which looks nice and doesn't smudge is quite the quest, and a fountain pen is the smudgiest of them all. And so I was really rather upset to not be allowed to use the pens which I found suitable. That being said, I used the fountain pen. It's possible for a left-hander to write without smudging a fountain pen, but it essentially involves curling your hand into a ridiculously awkward position above the line you're writing on, which gets pretty sore quite quickly for me, so I wrote normally. For the next 2 days, I wrote absolutely everything with my new fountain pen, except there was a problem. Every page I wrote was completely illegible and looked somewhat like a piece you'd find in a modern art museum. The entire page was just a big gradient of black ink. It took all of about half an hour before I was called out on this. An English teacher pulled me aside and borderline shouted at me, saying things like, "A pathetic effort," and "How can you be content to produce something as poor as this?" The work itself was fine, it was just illegible due to the fact that I was doing as I was so strictly told. Being the age that I was pretty upset to have been spoken to like that, but I persisted with my use of the fountain pen. Besides, I was only doing as I had been instructed. For the next week, every single piece of work I produced was essentially a blank page, nothing of any legibility could be seen on any page I wrote. It wasn't long before I was called to the headmaster's office. Thankfully for me, he was a very reasonable man unlike most of the teachers, and as such realized my struggle with writing with what might as well been a hosepipe of ink. After I explained the encounters I'd had with many of the teachers, he gave me a handwritten and signed letter from himself, essentially saying that I had permission to use any suitable pen in any lesson, and any further unfair discipline due to my writing should be reported straight to him. This letter was my lifeline, my chance to actually write. But I had to use it carefully. Instead of showing it to each teacher at the beginning of each lesson the following week, I waited. I made the smudgiest, worst-looking work I possibly could. Becoming ever more fed up with my pathetic behavior and lack of discipline, some of the teachers became increasingly unfair on me, starting to take a serious dislike against me. I didn't mind though. I played it smart. I let them have their fun, shouting at me, giving my work 0 marks, working up to their breaking point of irritation. I would wait till the end of each lesson for my regular telling off before silently, ever so slightly smugly pulling out my precious letter and gently laying it on the teacher's desk. I would say that, with the exception of perhaps one teacher, every single teacher exhibited that expression of crap. Since that point onwards, every single one of them treated me with the utmost respect, albeit very begrudgingly. Better yet, at the beginning of the next year, any rules relating to stationery or handwriting were removed from the rulebook altogether, and so, to really grind in my point, I typed every single possible piece of work that I could for the remainder of my time there, seeing as most of the teachers viewed typing work as even more of a sin than writing with a cheap pen. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.